Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight.
We are thrilled about the Texas law.
But what about the abortion law in Illinois? Activists on both sides of the abortion debate gear up for a legislative battle.
The Chicago Police Department faces a class action lawsuit over its stop and frisk practices, and attorneys say the number of plaintiffs could be massive.
It was hard when we went through the initial surge, and then it kind of kept going, and it's still going.
Nearly a year and a half into the pandemic, some healthcare workers report feeling burnout. We talk with medical professionals about what they're seeing during COVID's latest surge.
Local researchers look into how air pollution is shortening life expectancies around the world.
A proposed contract for Chicago's police union passes a key city council committee. What's next?
Illinois' eviction moratorium is coming to an end. What that could mean for pets and animal shelters in the area.
Footwork saves lives.
How a popular downtown structure is paying homage to a classic Chicago dance style.
Boxville has provided us the platform to increase access for people in the community.
And a Bronzeville incubator boxes up business savvy for fledgling entrepreneurs. But first, some of today's top stories. A group of West and South Side nonprofits announced a partnership to combat violence. This after a deadly Labor Day weekend where 6 were killed and more than 60 were shot. Among the dead, 4-year-old Michael Moultrie Jr., who was shot and killed while staying in a Woodlawn apartment. The new initiative announced today is called Justice Rising Project 77, and it aims to provide free legal services and restorative justice to anyone caught up in the cycle of incarceration.
We believe that our young people are worth it. We believe that redemption is possible and that redemption doesn't absolve us, but it creates an opportunity for hope. And we believe that just as justice is rising, so is hope with this partnership.
U.S. Customs and Border officials announced they seized more than a dozen counterfeit COVID-19 vaccination cards at O'Hare Airport on August 31st. Officials say the cards had arrived from China and were headed to an address in Ohio when they were first found at O'Hare. They say that they were deemed fraudulent after an examination revealed that they had low quality and misspelled words. Former Illinois U.S. Senator Adlai Stevenson has died. Stevenson served as Illinois Senator from 1970 to 1981. Here he is appearing on Chicago Tonight. He also ran for governor in 1982 and 1986, but lost both times to former Republican Illinois Governor Jim Thompson. Stevenson was 90 years old. And the COVID vaccine is officially going to the animals. The Brookfield Zoo began administering animal-friendly vaccines to some of its inhabitants, including Cayenne the Serval, seen here. The vaccine was donated by a Michigan-based company, and the zoo says animals can spread and get sick from COVID-19, so it's important they get vaccinated. And they've prioritized primates, carnivores, big cats, and bears to get the first shots. And up next, a look at the impact of the new Texas abortion law on Illinois, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Texas has taken a controversial approach to banning abortions once cardiac activity is detected, with a law that allows citizens to sue anyone involved with the practice, including someone who gives a woman a ride to the doctor who performs the procedure. But what does that mean for other states, including right here in Illinois? Amanda Vinicky joins us now with some answers. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, that Texas law went into effect last week after a split U.S. Supreme Court rejected a challenge to it, citing legal complexities. And as you can imagine, that law sparks divergent opinions. Illinois Right to Life Director Amy Gerke calls it a tremendous victory.
We are thrilled about the Texas law, as you can imagine. We know that this law will save over 300 babies a year in Texas. We know that this is a protective pro-life law that not only protects unborn children, but it protects their mothers from a very predatory abortion industry as well.
And here's State Representative Anna Moeller. She's sponsor of a measure that would essentially expand access to abortions in Illinois.
The Texas law shows us the full picture of a truly radical attack on reproductive rights, authorizing anti-abortion activists to essentially seek out a bounty on women trying to access the health care that they need, and those who are trying to assist them.
And so divergent opinions there, but there are several points on which advocates from both sides do agree. For one, that this case is a signal portending the potential gutting of Roe versus Wade, which since 1973 has protected a woman's right to have an abortion in the United States. Now, the nation's high court will this fall consider the Dobbs case that's challenging a Mississippi law that bans abortions before a fetus is viable. Now, if that happens, both sides also agree it won't have a direct impact in Illinois due to a law that anticipates the possibility of no more Roe v. Wade.
If Roe v. Wade goes away, maybe we should start to be honest and say when Roe v. Wade goes away, it's put back to each state to make its decision about whether to allow abortion in their state. And so what we have in Illinois is the Reproductive Health Act that makes sure a patient can get a safe and legal abortion in our state.
Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the Reproductive Health Act in 2019 that enshrines the right, as you just heard, to abortions, also to birth control in Illinois, as well as taking out references to abortions from Illinois' criminal code. It also requires insurers to cover abortions here. But there is still a statute on Illinois' books that both anti-abortion and abortion rights activists alike are watching closely, and that is Illinois' parental notification law that requires providers to contact a parent if anyone 17 or younger seeks an abortion. Now, Gerke says that her main goal this coming legislative session is preserving what she calls Illinois' last remaining pro-life law.
This has been couched as an abortion bill, and on its face it looks that way, but this bill is really about protecting parents' rights to be involved in the healthcare decisions of their minor daughters, and also to protect minor girls from human traffickers, sex predators.
She says in that regard that those in the sex trade, not good if they get pregnant and are often coerced into having abortions. And the parental notification law, she points out, does not require parental consent, merely that they are given a heads up. Representative Moeller, meanwhile, says this notification requirement can put minors in danger. It is her priority, as well as that of other abortion rights advocates, to get it repealed in the coming legislative session.
There are young women in our state, and there will be young women coming to Illinois seeking, constitutionally protected access to health care, who don't have relationships or healthy relationships with the adults that are listed in the Parental Notification Act that are required for notification, and are fearful of having these adults being notified by a doctor about this care, and it's putting them in harm's way.
She says it's the only procedure during pregnancy that requires notification. She says a young woman could potentially have dangerous procedures throughout pregnancy without any parental involvement. Now, Moeller did introduce a similar measure last year, and abortion, not a strictly partisan issue, but it is worth pointing out that despite Democratic supermajorities in both chambers of the General Assembly, that measure did not advance. She is, however, hopeful that it will this coming session. Legislators potentially galvanized by that Texas law, especially as Planned Parenthood's President Welch suspects other states may soon copycat.
I think it's going to be a little bit of a race to the bottom for some of our surrounding states to see which of them can pass a similar law the quickest. I've heard that Kentucky is having a special session because they want to hurry up and pass a similar law, but they might get beat by Missouri, who's still in session. And so they've got that law, automatically on the books.
Welch says it's important for women to know, no matter what is happening there in Texas, abortions are still legal and accessible in Illinois. That Illinois does welcome those from states with more severe restrictions on abortions. To have the procedure here is chief among the concerns for Illinois Right to Life. Now, a quick mention of a new law that is, tangentially related to this. This was signed by Governor Pritzker in July. It makes birth control available without a prescription so that come January, pharmacists can dispense hormonal birth control without a doctor's order. And back to you, Paris.
All right, Amanda, thank you very much. Starting a business is tough for anyone, but especially for black entrepreneurs who average less than a third of startup capital than their white counterparts. That's according to a study by the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. Entrepreneurs are often told to avoid boxing themselves in, but in Bronzeville, small business startups are getting off the ground by putting themselves in boxes at the corner of 51st and Calumet. Chicago Tonight's Erica Gunderson explains what we mean.
Boxville is for everybody. We have the hot dog box, which has like gourmet filet mignon hot dogs. And we have Synergy Foods behind us, which believes in produce, and they make gourmet hand-dipped apples.
Most shipping containers are packed with consumer goods, but the brightly painted shipping containers in Boxville are packed full of small businesses with big ambitions.
We have the work spot in the back that does silkscreen printing for small businesses, but then they also have their own clothing line called Project Escape.
Market lead Janine Mays says Boxville helps black entrepreneurs launch their small businesses by giving them a low-cost physical location as well as wraparound services.
They get a subsidized rent that comes from operating here, which kind of helps accelerate their business. They also get to work with our foundation and for anything for like marketing operations advice through our SBDC arm, which is the Small Business Development Center, through the SBA.
Best of all, it comes with a side of entrepreneurial community.
Kind of sparks the creativity to be around these entrepreneurs, people that are diverse in like what they offer, what they're selling, and what they stand for.
One of those creative businesses is the Meta House, which offers self-care and wellness items.
We've noticed that there's a huge disparity and gap for people of color, specifically in the wellness industry. So Boxville is the perfect platform, an affordable platform to really engage the community. Everybody wants to see everybody win. So whether that's sharing business advice, whether that's sharing resources, or even just customer base, it's really just like the synergistic relationship between all the businesses here.
Teen mentoring organization Male Mogul Initiative mostly operated out of Chicago Public Schools locations until the pandemic closed them last year. Executive Director Walter Mendenhall says that setting up shop in Boxville presented him with not only retail space, but an opportunity to expand upon his mission.
We're in the Bronzeville incubator. We saw that these boxes was available, and we figured that why don't we actually kind of put some legs to what we've been teaching these kids and talking about, and let them learn how to own and operate a business. This summer, we actually had our young men intern for a lot of the entities that you see here in Boxville. Great experiences, great learning opportunities, great internship opportunities, and we work together all the time.
I started my clothing line about 3 years ago. Seeing other entrepreneurs, it inspires you to be more of an example for other ones. So I just try to take in and learn as much from these guys as I can.
It shows how African Americans can actually be what they want to be, bring their product out in the world, and show them how hardworking they is, and how collaborative they is, and it just pushing them to their goals.
The Culinary Connection Initiative at Boxville offers aspiring food and hospitality entrepreneurs a recipe for business success.
A lot of times when people go into this industry, they think, okay, well, I know how to cook, and that's enough to sustain an entire business, and it really isn't. So they need to learn more about what their costing analysis would be, how to hire, how to train. All of these things really make a big part of what we do and what we can offer to help.
And twice a month, Boxville brings it all together. music, and shopping for themed Market Wednesday events.
Someone described it to me as the best backyard party and just a lot of fun.
They'll have themes, and the pop-up vendors will tie in with the culinary connection. So for example, today is Vintage Vegan, and so the culinary partners are all vegan, and the vendors are sustainable, they're vintage resellers.
Just thinking outside of the box while we're in the box.
Can I put my clothes up?
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
The Market Wednesday events at Boxville run through the end of October, and you can find more on the businesses in Boxville on our website. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
In Paris, there's much more ahead on the program, including a look at a class action lawsuit over the Chicago Police Department's stop and frisk practices. But first, a Chicago dance is getting a formal debut as part of the Art on the Mart. Arts correspondent Angel Ito shares how this massive projection titled Footnotes is paying tribute to a music and dance style that's had global impact.
It's about convening, bringing people together, and really maximizing the potential of this platform to catalyze conversations around the most important ideas, innovations, issues of our time.
Footworking is an art form that consists of both music and dance and has brought people together from around the world. Now it's bringing folks downtown to the building formerly known as the Merchandise Mart to see animated projections created by Brandon Calhoun.
Footwork, you know, it's not just the dance, it's the music as well. So the music genre of footwork is a fast-paced, electric sound thing. It's always been like a futuristic sound to me, drum basses and patterns that's in triplets. So it's like a lot of energy in the music. So like the music is a thing outside of the dance as well that people enjoy that don't necessarily dance.
Chicago footworker P-Top says you can't have one without the other as he breaks down the history of footworking.
It went from house to ghetto house to juking to footworking. So like, you know, footworking is not an easy thing, but it's not a hard thing too at the same time. It came from a community. It came from us expressing ourselves.
That's why footworking is about more than the art form. The dancers say it's about the communities it's not only saving, but creating.
Due to life situations and becoming a early age father, young father, I didn't have another outlet to release like stress or escape anything. So when I did see that, footworking became the biggest outlet for me.
It was just like a thing where it saved a lot of people. So the future of that, especially in Chicago, especially in like these impoverished neighborhoods, is like the more funding for it, the more outreach we got to kids and schools, the more they come in to get this energy off in a better way that's not violence. Footwork is not just a choreographed-based dance, it's also a improvisational dance. So we get to kind of talk to each other that way.
Co-producer Will Glass-Steagall agrees and says that's why the Art on the Mart projections are imperative in giving the community and the craft the flowers it deserves.
It became much more than just about the music or about the dance. It became about, you know, addressing inequality in a city where, you know, people are facing the most dire consequences, especially black communities. That kind of caused me to question, you know, the appropriation of footwork outside of Chicago and think about how can I help as a white person, make sure that the people who created this style continue to be recognized.
It's like a whole Chicago culture into one. Like, because you see, you got bucket boys, you have a DJ, you have a singer, you have a dancer. Like, it's just, you know, it's just a good mixture of everything, you know? And I feel like it's very important for younger generation and older generation because you're inspiring and you showing, you paying homage to the people before us.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And you can see Footnotes on the Mart at 9 and 9:30 through September 16th. This Friday evening, there'll be a live dance down by the river from 7 to 10, where you can see more of these moves in person. And we've got more information on that on our website. Healthcare workers are nearing their breaking point. That's what some working directly with COVID patients are saying during this recent increase. Hospitals in southern and central Illinois have felt the latest surge most acutely. And medical professionals across the state are preparing for what the fall and winter months could bring. Joining us to discuss what the latest surge looks like in hospitals across the state are Ashley Lakowicz, a respiratory therapist at Rush University Medical Center, Dr. J.C. Michael, Director of Critical Care at St. Francis Medical Center in Peoria and an intensive care doctor, Lupe Perez, a community nurse in Chicago and a member of Illinois' chapter of National Association of Hispanic Nurses, and Ossie Clow, an ICU nurse at HSHS St. John's Hospital in Springfield. Thanks to all four of you for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it. Dr. Michael, let's start with you, please. So Central and Southern Illinois, as we said, are especially feeling this latest COVID surge. What are you seeing at St. John's Hospital there in Springfield?
At St. Francis in Peoria, we're seeing an eerily similar surge. It's no problem. Thanks, Brandis. A very similar surge to the previous surges we've seen. We were kind of naively hoping that we were past all this during the summer. We had no COVID cases in our hospital. And then about a month ago, we started to see a trickle. And now the slope upwards of COVID cases looks exactly like our previous surges. And we don't know when it's going to peak.
Ossie Clow, how does this latest surge compare to those that you've seen in the past? Does this one hit closer to home for you?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more younger patients. We did get some the first surge, but they usually had comorbidities. But now these are people that are 20s, 30s, 40s, no medical history or anything like that, getting hit very, very hard and having to be put on the ventilator for an extended amount of time, and sometimes going to the drastic causes of ECMO and being so young.
Lupe Perez, earlier on in the pandemic, of course, we're hearing from many healthcare workers like yourselves who are afraid of going to work, contracting COVID-19, and then taking it home to their families. Is that a fear that you still carry?
Yes, I'm taking care of my mother who has lung issues herself. So every time I go into work, I'm always, making sure that I wear my PPE correctly, like I always have. But now it just seems like I'm taking extra precautions, and I'm more stressed, right? I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, what if I do bring home something to my mother, and that will be the end of it? So I am really, I'm really concerned, and it's just more overwhelming now than any other issue that we had before. So COVID has been really tough for all of us in that regard.
So you'd say this is the worst it's been for you professionally?
Yes.
Ashley Lakowicz, over to you. Do you feel burnt out?
Burnout is definitely a thing. It is present. I think we're all feeling all of those feelings. This pandemic has not only been physically challenging, but also mentally and emotionally challenging. And my first career was actually in mental health. So that is something that's near and dear to my heart, to make sure that we take care of ourselves as well, because we can't take care of patients if we can't take care of ourselves.
Ashley, what are some of the mental and emotional challenges you refer to?
In a 12-hour shift, you might go through more than 10 different emotions. You have grief, you have fear, you have concern, you have anger, you have frustration, you have sadness, you have numbness. So by dealing with all of those different emotions, it is exhausting.
Ossie Clow, how does being an ICU nurse during COVID compare to, before the pandemic? Obviously, based on what we hear from Ashley just now, obviously a lot more trauma and death, it sounds like.
Yeah, we, as ICU, we're not really, strangers to death. However, now it's become a norm for us. And as Ashley had mentioned earlier about the numbness, we do feel that as well, but the acuity level of our patient loads is increased drastically from what it was previously before the pandemic. We're having a hard time trying to keep up with our patients, as well as putting them on what we say comfort measures and trying to be with them when their loved ones can't. It's brought a tremendous amount of stress and just the abilities feeling like we're not doing enough, and a lot of frustration with that.
And Dr. Michael, would you say that, healthcare workers, the ones that you know and see and work with, are you all reaching sort of a breaking point?
I think if we're not breaking, I think we can see a point in the future where we might this surge feels a little different. We're 18 months into this, and I don't know what human can continue to slog through something like this for a year and a half. It also feels a little bit different in that it feels a little unnecessary. It's like 90+% of the people in my ICU are unvaccinated. And you just can't help but wonder if we had more vaccinated people, if we wouldn't have had to have this. And so there's some layer of frustration of the unnecessariness of it. We didn't have to have this. And so that makes it even more prone, I think, to have us reach our breaking point.
We spoke with another respiratory therapist from Rush, Brady Scott. He talked about how the public can help medical professionals. Here's what he said.
As much as we appreciate, people giving us credit for being on the front lines, I don't know that we are on the front lines. When you come to the ICU, that's the end of the lines. You're on the front line, the public, you're on the front line of the pandemic. You help us keep the hospitals not so full.
And Ashley, Brady Scott is a colleague of yours at Rush, but what do you say to people, to viewers, as they also continue to weather this pandemic?
I think there is a tremendous amount of misinformation out there, and COVID is real. It's present, and it's not just affecting the patients, it's affecting families and friends and the public in general. And, I understand the concerns about vaccination. I myself am a severe asthmatic, and I'm allergic to a wide variety of things. So I talked to my physicians, I read the research, and I asked questions before I made that decision to get vaccinated in December of 2020. And I highly encourage everybody to do the same.
Lupe, we've talked a lot tonight about, of course, the trauma that you all experience as healthcare professionals. How do you manage your own stress and emotions when dealing with all of this?
So recently, what I've been doing is just reaching out to my colleagues. So I am part of a nursing organization, so where we can get together and talk to each other about our stresses and what's currently affecting our personal lives, right? So a lot of outreach between all of us with our colleagues. So that's one of the things that I've been doing, which helps, right? And then also continuing to at least, advocate for vaccines and for masks, and in a way that when we volunteer, it's also a way that can help us, feel that we've done something for us, for our community, for ourselves. So that's a stress relief, and that is what we do too, to get through this.
And Dr. Michael, before we let you all go, what are your concerns as we head into the fall and the winter months?
My concern is that if we don't follow CDC guidelines and mask and get vaccine like Ashley and Lupe talked about, then we may never see the end of this. This may become endemic, and we may have 10 to 15 to 20 COVID patients in our ICUs forever. And that's just something that's going to keep us from getting back to normalcy. And I really hope it doesn't happen.
And I lied. I've got time for one more question, actually. Thank you, Dr. Michael. Ashley, before the pandemic, there was a bit of a shortage of respiratory therapists. How has this respiratory pandemic affected that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've always had a shortage since I've been a therapist for about 5 years. Being a respiratory pandemic, it has brought respiratory therapy in kind of the spotlight, whereas people didn't know what respiratory therapy was or what we do. And so now they're aware of who we are and what we can do. And based on that, our education applications are actually up. So hopefully we have more coming.
Okay. Thanks to all of you for the work that you do. Best of luck and stay safe. To Dr. J.C. Michael, Ashley Lakowicz, Ossie Klo, and Lupe Perez.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandis.
And now to Paris and what new research says about the impact air pollution has on life expectancy. Paris.
Brandis, a new study out of the University of Chicago says air pollution takes more than 2 years off of the average human's lifespan. That's more than causes like smoking, communicable disease, and war. Now, the study is out of the U of C's Air Quality Life Index and concludes the shortened life expectancy is due to particulate matter in the air from burning fossil fuels and other sources. While global COVID shutdowns temporarily provided clean air in different parts of the world, the new research underscores the exacerbating effects of climate change on air pollution. And joining us now with more is Ken Lee, Director of University of Chicago's Air Quality Life Index and a Senior Research Associate at the Department of Economics. Ken Lee, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so your research concludes that air pollution takes 2 years off of the average human's lifespan. Explain those findings.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, the most dangerous form of air pollution is PM 2.5. This is primarily caused by fossil fuel combustion. PM 2.5 are ultrafine particles that are suspended in the air and can enter our lungs and our bloodstream, causing all sorts of health issues. In fact, researchers have been showing for decades that breathing polluted air leads to a higher risk of dying from a variety of conditions like heart disease, lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and others. But in many parts of the world, awareness of this issue is still relatively low. And this is especially the case in developing countries where PM 2.5 particulate pollution levels can be many times higher than the levels that we typically experience here in North America and in Europe.
And PM 2.5, also called particulate matter. In the United States, the problem has gotten better over the decades, has it not? How bad is it here?
That's right. Well, actually, the U.S. On average is a pretty clean country compared to the rest of the world. There was a time in the late 60s, early 70s when air pollution was a huge issue in the U.S. But the U.S. was largely able to address extreme air pollution through the U.S. Clean Air Act and essentially very effective clean air policies.
So the average American is not having their lifespan shortened very much compared to other parts of the country. And you talk about India, China, those are areas that have really bad pollution. So how many years can the average human living there expect to have taken off at the end of their life because of pollution?
Right. Well, 82% of the world's population lives in areas where particulate pollution exceeds the WHO guideline of 10 micrograms per cubic meter. So in parts of South Asia or much of South Asia, PM 2.5 is on average roughly 70 micrograms per cubic meter. So that's 7 times higher than the WHO guideline. Globally, the average PM 2.5 concentration in 2019 was about 32 micrograms per cubic meter, so more than 3 times the WHO guideline. And so when we talk about air pollution, the questions that many people have are, number one, how bad is the air pollution in my country or in my own community, the community where I live? And number two, how is air pollution affecting my health and my life expectancy? So to sort of explain where these numbers come from, our team at the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago created something called the Air Quality Life Index, the AQLI, which is essentially a website that combines highly localized satellite-derived PM 2.5 data all across the world with academic economics research that quantifies the causal effect of sustained exposure to high pollution concentrations on life expectancy. And so we put those two things together into an interactive map that lets users or people zoom into any part of the world and view how the average pollution level has changed over time, what the current average pollution PM 2.5 level is, and then more importantly, answer the hypothetical question, how much longer would people live if this level of pollution were brought down to the WHO standard of 10 micrograms per cubic meter? And so when you do that globally, the AQLI shows that if pollution concentrations across the world could be brought to the WHO guideline, the average person would live 2.2 years longer.
All right, so what are the solutions? And you actually mentioned in your report that China, which has had big-time air pollution problems, especially in its biggest cities, has actually turned a corner a bit.
So in China, in the 2000s or so, China was consistently one of the top 5 most polluted countries in the world. But around that time, around the time of the Beijing Olympics, awareness of this issue, public concern about that issue began to increase. to the point that there was a lot of pressure on the government of China to do something. In 2013, pollution levels in Beijing had peaked at around 70 micrograms per cubic meter, 7 times higher than the WHO standard. And what happened was the following year in 2014, the premier of China announced a war against pollution, and they directed hundreds of billions of dollars to address the problem. They set very bold pollution reduction targets, especially in key areas like Beijing. They required some of their existing coal plants to reduce their emissions or to switch to natural gas. They even built pollution reduction incentives into the promotion plans for local government officials. So they had a host of policies, and as a result, China's seen a decline of roughly 30% in its PM2.5 between 2013 and 2019. And if you take the AQI results literally, that translates into about 1.5 years of a life expectancy gain for the average Chinese citizen as a result of those reductions.
So that's a promising sign for the most populous country on earth, and the fact that your study puts it in such stark life and death terms, perhaps that raises awareness about air pollution as well. All right, we're out of time. Our thanks to Ken Lee. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, Chicago's police officers could soon have a new union contract, but will it satisfy police reform advocates? The Illinois eviction moratorium is coming to an end, and pets need a home too. What some animal shelters are expecting. And plaintiffs in a lawsuit against CPD say police stop and frisk practices violated their constitutional rights. But first, some more of today's top stories. The Illinois National Guard continues to lend support to the search, rescue, and cleanup efforts in Louisiana more than a week after Hurricane Ida made landfall. The Illinois governor's office says a 68-member fire engine strike team is made up of members from various fire departments throughout the state. They'll assist firefighters in the region for 17 days. Also, 160 members of the Illinois Army National Guard will provide manpower and equipment to help with distributing supplies, storm debris removal, and route clearance. The city of Chicago is reminding business owners that anyone over the age of 2 must wear a mask inside their establishment, and that business must also post signage informing customers of the mask mandate. Thursday through Sunday, the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection conducted 110 investigations and issued 66 citations to mostly bars and restaurants for violating this public health order. Residents can also dial 311 to report any violations of the mask mandate. The leader of one of the country's best rehabilitation hospitals has died. The Shirley Ryan Ability Lab says its CEO and president, Dr. Joanne Smith, died following treatment for a cancer that she'd been battling privately while still leading the hospital. Smith has led the #1 ranked Ability Lab for the last 15 years, overseeing the opening of its 1.2 million square foot state-of-the-art research hospital. She also served as a faculty member at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine. At 60 years old, she's survived by her husband, 2 children, and extended family. And now to Paris for details on the proposed union contract for Chicago's police officers. Paris.
Brandis, a city council committee has unanimously endorsed a new contract with Chicago's police union. This as police officers have been working under terms of a contract that expired more than 4 years ago. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more details. All right, Heather, we've talked about this before, but remind us the key elements of this contract.
Well, it calls for police officers to get retroactive pay back to 2017. And so over the 8-year agreement, which will end in 2025, they will get a raise equivalent to 20%. Now, that averages out to about 2.5% per year, which is on par with other employee unions. But it will be a nice chunk of change for officers who haven't had a raise for a long time.
And there are a lot of reform elements in that contract, too. How much will this contract cost the city?
Well, in all, in 2022, it will cost the city $375 million to pay the retroactive pay and cover the raises that are called for in 2022. Now, how is the city going to pay that huge bill? Well, they've got $100 million saved, and they're going to refinance $1 billion in debt to save another $250,000 or another $250 million, I should say. The rest of it, well, we'll find out before the end of the month when the mayor unveils her budget proposal.
Those must be some very favorable rates on refinancing some of those loans. All right, Heather, we mentioned the reform aspects of this contract. Are police reform advocates happy with it?
Well, this deal would end a 40-year ban on the investigation of anonymous complaints filed against Chicago police officer. So that was a big issue raised in the Department of Justice's 2017 investigation of the CPD. So that is a big deal. However, the big outstanding issue remains about whether cops should be allowed to work however long they want at a second job. That issue is still under negotiation and may end up in front of an arbitrator. And there are other issues that will remain that police reform advocates aren't pleased with, including cops will continue to get 24 hours before they have to speak with an investigator after a police shooting.
A lot of cops moonlight as private security or other jobs, as you mentioned there. All right, so the full city council has to vote on this. Do you believe it has the votes, or could there be a block of alder people that block it?
Well, there could be, but the city's labor negotiators were very clear when presenting this deal to the City Council's Committee on Workforce Development. If it's not approved by the City Council, it will be, quote, a roll of the dice, whether there will be a better agreement or an agreement really anytime soon, because as you said at the top, it took 4 years, more than 4 years to negotiate this agreement, and it was a very difficult process.
Yeah, 4 years, and I mean, it seemed like the two sides would never come to the table, and they do have an agreement here. We'll have to see what City Council does. All right, Heather, thanks so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. More than 2 million people might be eligible to join a class action lawsuit over the Chicago Police Department's stop and frisk practices. That's according to attorneys suing CPD and the city, a lawsuit that was recently certified as a class action by a federal judge. The plaintiffs argue CPD disproportionately targets young and middle-aged black and brown men with stop and frisk tactics in violation of their constitutional rights. Joining us are Rashawn Lindsay, he's one of the plaintiffs in the suit, and attorney Antonio Romanucci of the firm Romanucci and Blandon. We asked the city and the police department for comment. The city's law department says it does not comment on ongoing litigation. The police department did not respond to a request for comment. Antonio Romanucci and Rashawn Lindsay, thanks to you both for joining us. Antonio, let's start with you, please. When are police actually allowed to make a street stop, and what do you accuse them of actually doing?
So police are allowed under the law, under a 50-year-old law called Terry v. Ohio, they're allowed to make what are called street stops, but only under very certain conditions. They need what's called reasonable articulable suspicion that either a crime has been committed or that one will be committed in order to make a constitutional stop. What we're alleging is that the city of Chicago did not follow the law, in this case, Terry v. Ohio, and that they made random stops that targeted Black and Hispanic people. They made stops to the tune of over 2 million of them. And that's why we're saying that this is a good class that was certified by Judge Andrea Wood, because these were unconstitutional stops.
Rashawn Lindsay, what was your experience being stopped by CPD?
Well, I was just walking that night with my cousin and a friend. And 1 minute, I got my headphones in my ear, walking down the street back home to my mama's house. Next minute, I have a taser on me, and I'm being told to throw my hands up. There's no warning, no siren, just turn around, tase it. You don't want to get tased, put your hands up. Hands went right up.
And what happened then? Just, I mean, it sounds like nothing came of that stop. Were you charged with anything? What came of that?
No charges whatsoever. We were handcuffed to the roof to each other, brought to the hood of the car, searched, all our stuff pulled out of our pockets. Asked if we had marijuana, of course. We didn't. After they ran our IDs, they said we were one of the good ones, and they just let us go. No reason given why we were stopped at all.
Now, Antonio Romanucci, according to the evidence that you submitted, between 63 and 71% of stops between 2010 and 2017 were black residents. Between 17 and 21% were Latinx, and 7 to 13% were white. Based on all of that and what you mentioned earlier, how many people do you think could be a part of this class action?
Well, what we know is this, that in the year prior to the lawsuit that was filed, in the full calendar year of 2014, there were 716,000 of these stops that were made. Not one of these stops led to an arrest. 0 over 716,000. Not one of these stops led to the confiscation of an illegal gun or illegal drugs. So that was in 1 year. We know that over a 4 to 5 year period, there were approximately 2 million or more of these stops. So that's only in the class period. So you can imagine that there are many, many other people that have been subjected to this unconstitutional practice of no suspicion, of having no reasonable articulable suspicion of having committed a crime or about to commit a crime. So the numbers are staggering, just absolutely staggering. But we know that in this class period, there are at least 2 million people who were subjected to a stop with no arrest.
2 million. Rashawn Lindsay being one of them. Rashawn, why did you want to be a part of this suit?
I thought it would bring about a good change, that we finally had an opportunity to change the police system in and of itself from the inside, because it's quite frankly inexcusable for that many people to be stopped for zero reason and no arrests.
Antonio, back to you. We know that CPD for several years has been going through an effort that is supposed to reform its stop and frisk practices under an agreement with the ACLU. Has that brought about any change?
We haven't seen any meaningful change. They did bring out what's called an investigatory report, I forgot the exact acronym that they came out with, but they're not training on this new stop and frisk policy. And that's part of the problem. The city of Chicago creates policies, they create orders, but then they don't train on them appropriately. And that's part of the opinion that came out from the judge in this case, is that the city of Chicago has a custom practice and policy to not train on these policies, and therefore leads to unconstitutional practices.
Rashawn Lindsay, what impact do you think, being frequently stopped and frisked by CPD officers has on the people in the community, not just by those who experience it, but also those who witness it and know about it?
Well, there's already a big distrust in the community of the police. The frequent stops and the frisk for no reason, that only erodes trust even further. Makes no one wants to call the police when something goes wrong. Handle it yourself type of mentality. Police can't be trusted and they won't handle it well. So it completely erodes trust.
Antonio, what would you like to see come of this lawsuit?
Well, clearly there has to be some absolute deep cultural change, because we're not only talking about the class period that was certified by the judge, but we're really talking about decades and decades of a longstanding culture of mistrust between community members and police. People ask, well, why do people run? Why do people panic when they have police encounters? Well, we know that the continued drip of stop and frisk, of distrust between community members, has led to this. It's led to middle income flight from the city of Chicago. So unless we make the changes necessary, which include, obviously, a very comprehensive training practice as to what is reasonable articulable suspicion, when a person can be stopped, and then regain the trust of people like Rashawn and the millions of other people in this city, then we will see systemic change. Until then, we won't have change. And that's why we want City Hall to come to the table. We will walk there, and we want change to happen so that we can be the city that we say that we are. We are a great city. let's be one.
And before we let the two of you go, Rashawn Lindsay, what is your message to people who are interested in possibly being a part of this suit?
Well, number one, I would say report it. If you believe something unjust happened to you, if your rights are violated, report it. Whether it be anonymous or you want to put your name out there, definitely report it. Number two, look back at any time you were stopped and ask yourself if your rights are violated. Number one thing I'll say, know your rights. As long as you know your rights, you'll be good.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Our thanks to attorney Antonio Romanucci and plaintiff Rashawn Lindsay for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, the state's eviction moratorium is coming to an end, what it could mean for pets. But first, a look at the weather.
Illinois' eviction moratorium is in place for one more month, but many residents still fear they'll be out of a home once that ban lifts. And now animal shelters are preparing for what could be an influx of pets that need a home too. This as some shelters are already seeing an uptick from COVID-19. And joining us to discuss what the end of the eviction moratorium could mean for pets is Tracy Elliott, President and CEO of the Anti-Cruelty Society. Tracy Elliott, welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so whenever the moratorium on evictions lifts, and assuming there are a lot of evictions, what could that mean for pets and for shelters?
Well, housing is the number one reason people surrender their animals to us in the first place, and that's notwithstanding COVID and the economic problems that have come with that. So it is possible in the worst case scenario that a lot of people are going to lose their housing and have a difficult time finding pet-friendly housing to move into, so that our shelter and others in the region may be inundated with surrenders. And we're very much hoping that doesn't happen. And we are geared towards working very hard on prevention programs to make sure that that does not occur and that we can keep families whole.
All right,
But
so
what
are those prevention programs, assuming that some families maybe are temporarily out of a home, but they don't want to lose their pets?
Right. That's a very good question. So we have a program called Short-Term Accommodations for Emergencies, or the SAFE program, which will take your animal in if you are in one of those emergencies, maybe a domestic violence situation, or you're hospitalized and don't have family to take care of it, or you are temporarily looking for new housing that is pet friendly. We can take the animal in for 45 days and care for it. And we have seen an uptick in that program just recently. We have about 40 animals in that program right now, so we're prepared for more. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you what the overall situation is in terms of how many animals you're caring for right now versus, a typical summer.
It's not really unusual right now. We have about 415 animals in the shelter and about 165 in foster. That's pretty typical for this time of year. We are back to most of our volume in terms of intake, adoption, and other programs are back to 2019 levels. Comparing them to the 2020 doesn't really work because everything was so suppressed, except for foster. We had more foster parents than ever last year. So we're kind of back to quote-unquote normal, but we're preparing for potentially a greater influx because of this. So another way that we've stepped up to help is a lot of times folks find pet-friendly housing, but the landlord requires a pet deposit and they can't afford it because it's a lot of cash out of your pocket to do a security deposit, perhaps moving costs, and then to pay a pet deposit on top of that. So we have developed a program where we can subsidize a pet deposit at $250 to help folks who are in those situations as well.
Certainly a barrier. Another barrier might be folks thinking, well, I'm going back to work now and I don't have time to stay at home and care for a pet. What about that?
Well, we haven't seen much of that. Our surrender numbers are actually no worse than they were in 2019 pre-COVID. So we're not seeing that. However, we do understand that some people are going to face that situation, and where we can help is we have a behavior helpline. So if you want to know, how do I get my animal ready for me to be out of the house more often, the behavior helpline can help with that.
And the other aspect of that is, I mean, people might be hesitant to adopt because they're working and they're thinking, I just don't have the time. Is that where fostering comes in?
Yes, that's a good substitute. Obviously, a foster animal still requires full attention and care, but it isn't a permanent commitment. Of course, neither is adoption. We always tell people, if it doesn't, we want it to be a perfect match. If it's not, bring the animal back to us and we'll find a perfect match for it. We do not look upon that as a negative thing at all. It's actually a positive thing. But in fostering, yes, you have a limited period of time when you're with the animal, and when the animal's ready to get back to the adoption floor, or even a direct adoption from foster, you could be relieved of that responsibility and still have had the joy of helping an animal get ready to find its forever home.
A lot of things to think about. All right, Tracy Elliott, those pictures of dogs and cats, they certainly are tempting for those of us that don't have any and might want to adopt one. All right, thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.